Hey friend! What you're about to watch is a 60-minute live stream that I did in the past with Lily Konings, all about how to prepare for your design job interview. Lily is a designer at Facebook and previously worked at AngelList, and so she shared a lot of great ideas and wisdom around how to best prepare for your design job interview. We covered topics like portfolio best practices, how to prepare your cover letter and your resume, going through the interview process like applying, whiteboard challenges, take-home exercises. And then also we touched on an important topic around imposter syndrome. If you want to know when I next go live for live streams like this, you can subscribe over on SuperPeer, and the link is in the description below. Enjoy the stream. Hello everybody, welcome to today's live stream. You should be able to hear us, see us. Let us know in the chat if there's any technical trouble there and you're not seeing or hearing us, but I'm very excited to do this stream today with Lily. We're going to talk all about how to prepare for your design job interview, and it's going to be about an hour long. I'm really excited to get into some of the topics that we have planned. Before we do that, Lily, would love for you to introduce yourself. Can you let the group know a bit more about you?
Hey, Femke. Good morning from the West Coast. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Quick intro about myself. I'm a product designer at Facebook right now. I work on Messenger and Instagram, and I've been there for up to about a year, so not super long amount of time, but certainly been enjoying my work there. Before Facebook, I was at AngelList, and then before that, I was at IBM, where I also was a little bit of a software engineer. So did a bit of a pivot there.
Wow,
but,
I didn't know that about you. That's cool.
I studied CS actually. My major is actually in computer science, but I don't like telling people because my knowledge is completely like off. Like I don't know anything anymore.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to have you here on the stream, and I popped links to your Twitter, LinkedIn, and then also your newsletter, which I think is such a great newsletter. Can you tell us a little bit more about the newsletter that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I call it jokingly like an advice column. Like if you remember back in the day in a newsletter when you used to write people for advice and you'd be like, hello, like here's my bit. That's kind of what I think about it as, because I do get a lot of the, very common questions, and I just want them in just one place and people can easily reference them. But also, I think it was just like an attempt to try to scale mentorship a little bit more. I just can't reach and have one-on-one calls with literally everybody who wants to. And so I just wanted a way to help people at scale.
Yeah.
So I answer questions bi-weekly as much as I can.
Yeah, I love it. It's like reading a little advice column. I love the thoughts that you share there. Awesome. Well, just to sort of let the group know, so for this stream, Lily and I have a few topics that we want to dig into in relation to applying for a job, and then we're going to save some time at the end for Q&A. So any questions you have during the stream, pop them in the chat, and I'm going to save them and we'll get back to them at the end. So we won't necessarily be answering questions immediately, but do know that when you're popping them in the chat, we are saving them and they'll come up for discussion later on. It would be great to hear a bit about where everyone is from. I see some people saying hello from Seattle. I saw some earlier from Norway, LA, Nigeria. So awesome to see always people from around the world joining in. It will also be great to hear where you're at in your job journey. Are you thinking about getting a new job? Are you currently applying for a new job? Maybe you're in the interview process. Let us know in the chat. It's always interesting to hear where you're at in that journey as well. Hi, New York, Poland, London. Such a great group from around the world. And just a reminder too that we love it if you share this on Twitter or Instagram or wherever your platform is during the stream. It's always my favorite after the stream to go and look and see all the posts done during the stream. So please do feel free to share this as we go through. Okay, so now let's get into the discussion. I think the first hot topic in relation to sort of applying for a job is often the portfolio. I get a lot of questions about preparing for your portfolio, what to include, what to not include, how to kind of stand out in your portfolio when there's so much competition in design these days for applying for jobs. What are your thoughts around the portfolio, Lily? Like, what to you sort of makes a portfolio stand out? What are the key things that you think are worth including?
A great question. I think the first and foremost thing I always say is that you should absolutely put the work that reflects the job that you want. And this sounds really obvious, but not a lot of people do that. So like, for instance, if you want to be a mobile designer, make sure you have mobile work on there. If you want to be in fintech, make sure you have similarly complex problem spaces, or you experience working with data visualization, just anything that helps the employer visualize you in that role that you're applying for. So I think that first and foremost. And in terms of how to make yourself stand out, to be extremely honest with you, nothing stands out more than just great work. There's no amount of, like flashy animations or like cool page transitions on your website that will compensate for, work that isn't great. So always just work on your, case study as much as possible and make that stand out as much as you can.
Yeah. I love your advice around having the work that like reflects the kind of work you want to be doing, right? I've seen so many portfolios where it's like kind of a mishmash of different design skills. There's like some graphic design and some print design and UX work, and it can be a bit difficult to kind of meddle through that and try to figure out like, okay, well, what is the core strength or skill of this person? And like, why are they applying for this role when they have graphic design work? Like, this is a product design role. It sort of doesn't quite line up. So I definitely agree. I think putting the kind of work that you want to be doing on your portfolio is really, really key. Something else I've noticed in terms of like standing out, I agree. I think the work is really important. I've been seeing some really like interesting takes on like people's about pages and like using that as a place to inject some personality. I've seen some really cool ones that like people will list their like values as a designer or like principles that they like stand really strong to. And I think that's always really interesting, just to get a little bit of a deeper dive look into the person behind the work and like what they value as a designer.
Totally. I've definitely heard recruiters say that they really appreciate that personal touch. If you really feel you, even through the style of your website, like some of them are really cute, some of them are really like, really like dark mode, or like it just really gives like a little bit more about you. I do try not to dive too deep into you as a person, just to make sure I minimize bias, but I do think that's a great way to express yourself as much as possible. But I feel like if you were to really, really want to make yourself stand out, to be honest, I find that the most memorable case studies, at least for me, are ones where it's obvious you've made the effort to make it as easily digestible and skimmable as possible. Does that make sense? Like, I think that you are respecting my time by putting in the work to make this super, super skimmable and try to deliver the max amount of impact in the quickest way. So like cutting down like a 2,000-word essay, for example, into just the key information, having that metadata at the very top, making sure that your headers have like super valuable information in it. It's not just like problem statement, but like the literal actual problem statement in the header itself. Stuff like that really does help. And I actually really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, let's talk about case studies for a minute, because I feel like that's like the meaty part of a portfolio. And I've definitely, in talking to designers, like heard them struggle with how long should my portfolio or should my case study be? Like, what kind of information should I include? Should I be really detailed or just high level? So it sounds like for you kind of prefer the like skimmable and compact, but still has a lot of value in it, right? Because I've definitely seen both sides of the spectrum, like really long ones where it's a lot of detail. And quite frankly, I don't often read the entire thing. And then I've seen like the super short condensed one, which I tend to call more of like a showcase, where it's like some high final visuals and then like not much speaking to what the project was about. So yeah, it's interesting to hear about like your preference for finding that balance.
I don't know about you, but I've actually seen some amazing examples of people straddling that line. So for example, I remember this one portfolio I saw where they would say, for the user research section, they would just put the bullet points for what came out of that section, and then an actual expand button to go through the rest of it. But by default, it was hidden. And so that was actually really nice. Like if I chose to dig a little bit deeper, I could. And that was really, really clever engineering.
Yeah, that is really, really nice. I feel like I've seen a couple of those as well. So yeah, it's a good way to kind of like have that high level like takeaway, but then you can dive deeper if you want to.
Totally.
What to you is kind of like the key things that make up a good case study? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, okay. So I know you just said you've seen, the broad spectrum of really, really long ones versus really short ones. And to
Mm-hmm.
be honest, I have seen that pattern mapped against how senior you are. So the more junior you are, the longer your case study, and the more senior you are, the shorter it is. And I think that's super common and super normal as well, because the more junior you are, the more you kind of have to prove that you understand the process. And so
Right.
process will always take a long time to explain. And the more senior you are, the more focused you are on impact and making sure you understand that you're delivering good work. And so it's really just like a bunch of mocks and then like some metrics. So I completely understand, depending on where you are in your career, the length and the amount of details in your case study may vary. But I would
Mm-hmm.
still urge for junior designers to be very selective about that process. I've just seen so many like double diamond,
Oh,
diagrams in the
yeah.
portfolio. I've seen so many like whiteboards filled with post-its. I've seen just basically every single example of like very basic stuff that makes you a designer. And I just don't think that contributes as much as you think it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you had to like choose maybe the top 1 to 3 things that these people should focus on instead, what would that be? What would your advice be there?
Okay, a little bit tricky because you may not always have it, but first and foremost, absolutely impact. Always focus on
Mm-hmm.
impact. What did your design achieve in the company? So if you're a little bit junior, you may not have exact metrics, or maybe it's a little bit more scoped to like a very minor interaction. So I understand that might be a little bit difficult, but if you do have it, absolutely prioritize impact. Second, I would prioritize high fidelity mocks over low fidelity. So
Yeah.
as much as possible, I would put the final designs up top and then also focus it with throughout your case study, rather than like, let's go through the sketches on the napkin.
Yeah.
That's like I know that you want to prove you like iterated and you've refined the design, but I
Yeah.
don't think you need to do it to like a full, 2 paragraph, 3 paragraphs worth. And then let's see, final one. I think it's important to show constraints and trade-offs. I think that, Femke, I'm sure you know this, but designing in the real world is really messy. It's extremely messy, and there's literally never a project that goes perfect. There's always going to be like weird constraints that come in. Engineers
Yeah.
going to be like, this can't be done. Weird, or like leadership may be like, your deadline is changing, or we're pivoting directions, and all of these wacky things.
Yeah.
Like, let us know like these things are happening and how you handle those. I think that's actually a sign of a really mature designer.
Yeah.
So those are my 3.
Yeah, I love those 3, especially the last one, because I agree. I feel like case studies, I don't know, maybe there's been this unspoken rule or something to like only put out all the amazing part of a project. But I
Yeah.
think you and I both know that like there's a lot of messy parts too. And that stuff is still equally valuable, I think, to talk about and to write a story about in your case study. We can learn a lot about you as a designer as to how you handle those certain situations, or like how you dealt with those constraints, how you moved forward, how you collaborated, how you worked through a problem together. Those are equally as valuable to learn about as the work itself. So yeah, totally agree. I love those 3.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, like I said, I certainly understand if it's a little bit difficult as a junior designer, because you don't get a lot of exposure to huge impact work, or maybe
Yeah.
you are given work that don't, by nature have a lot of constraints. But try to
Yeah.
really like scope them out, see if you can find them. They probably are there, and just acknowledging it is a big step forward.
Agreed. No project is perfect.
Mhm.
All right, let's talk a little bit about resumes, cover letters. Those things are often required when you're applying for a job. any thoughts on some best practices when it comes to creating a resume? What are some things you've seen that you think, oh wow, this is really cool, this works well?
Resumes, I have to default to my last answer, which is impact first. Main reason being, I do see a lot of resumes where it'll say like, oh, in this job, I make user journeys, I wireframe, all of these very process-driven sentences, and they just tend to describe you as a designer, not an exceptional one. Like a designer does all these things, like it's a given. And so it doesn't really need to be described further. I think what's more important is describe projects that you worked on and the impact that they had as much as possible. If you have numbers and metrics, even better. Some of the best resumes I've seen are by growth designers because their work is always tied to metrics. And so it's just amazing for me to see like on their resume, like I 2x'd this conversion rate. That's super impactful. But otherwise, I don't know about you, but I do feel like these days you have to really play the game when it comes to getting your resume through the ATS. And in case anyone in the audience aren't familiar, the ATS is basically like a tool that recruiters use to put you in the pipeline and track you through and attach your resume through it and everything. But the ATS is also like, they come with some sort of intelligence or algorithm in it nowadays that kind of screen your resume for the recruiter because they get so many. And so it's like a robot looking at your resumes. And there's a way for you to get your resume scored if you just Google like ATS resume score and just make sure that you're hitting as much, like as close to 100% as possible so that it gets to the recruiter eye as well.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about these ATS automated screening processes over the last couple of years. It seems to have really picked up, especially at these big companies, right? Like a Facebook, where I'm sure they're getting so many applications on a daily basis. Can you share more a bit about, you talked a little bit about like showing the impact and like talking about your kind of responsibility or impact on a project and a role. Do you expect on a resume to see like their sort of experience at companies as well as like projects that they've worked on, or what's kind of the best balance there? Because I've sometimes seen resumes that like will list projects instead of like work experience. Curious what your thoughts are on that, if you think there's some way to combine those, or what do you think is more impactful?
By projects, do you mean like side projects or projects within the company?
Projects within the company, or I guess I've also noticed this from like designers who have been freelancers or worked at agencies, for example. They more like will list projects and clients as opposed to like their time at an employer.
Got it. Okay. Disclaimer, I have very little experience understanding the freelance world. I think it's amazing. And I have friends who freelance, but unfortunately I have never screened a freelancer. I've only ever screened in-house designers.
Oh,
so
interesting.
I can only talk about that. But as for projects within your past companies that you've done, I normally just fold those underneath the company because it's still important to give them an accurate timeline of your experience. Because at the end of the day, like there is a amount of experience required for each job. And so they need to make sure you first and foremost meet that requirement. And then underneath the company, say like at AngelList, like I redesigned this. And so under AngelList, I'll just be like, I redesigned this. It resulted in, X amount of impact, like done. Super easy.
I think that's a really good takeaway for folks to like, in addition to the work experience and like the employer you've worked at, highlight those key projects, right, that you've done and like what the impact of those projects are. That's often what recruiters will be looking for. So as much as you can give them that information up front in a resume, I think is really, really helpful.
Totally.
What about cover letters? I personally, less and less over the years, have written cover letters. It's something that I don't really do anymore. I think if I were to apply for a new job today, I probably wouldn't write one. But maybe, I don't know, maybe that's to do with the level I'm at. I have a few years of experience. I don't feel like I need one. I feel like my work speaks for itself. But yeah, what do you think?
Oh my goodness. Cover letters is such a controversial topic. And so when I was at AngelList, I worked on the HR tools. So I interviewed a lot of hiring managers and recruiters on this exact topic. And I asked them straight up, like, do you read the cover letter? And I think the percentage of people who said yes was almost like 50%, which is
Oh,
devastating.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was insane. It might have been just under 50% as well. It was a devastatingly small number for the amount of work that they make you do. But usually when they look at cover letters, it's probably because of a couple of key reasons. One is if you have a major gap in your timeline, so maybe you took like
Right.
1 or 2 years off. I think they just want to know why, to make sure you're not like, I don't know, just bumming around. Or maybe you jump jobs a lot, so maybe all of your companies in the past couple of years have been like one company a year. Just want to make sure you're not going to ditch this one as well.
Right.
Also, maybe some additional explanations or additional color around a more unconventional background. That usually helps a lot. So if you're coming from engineering like me, I had a cover letter that explained why I thought my skills as an engineer translated into design. And so hopefully, I don't know, I can't prove this, but hopefully that helped in my candidacy in certain jobs. So I would say, like, if those circumstances apply to you, certainly write a cover letter for sure. But to be honest, like, even if the number is like 25% of recruiters read your cover letters, if you're a junior designer, for sure, I would just cover your bases and write one anyway.
Yeah.
Just make it super short. I think mine was like half a page. It was like,
Yep.
it was like no dice. Like it was fine. So cover your bases, and then like once you get, to the point where your work speaks for itself, certainly just forget it.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. My last cover letter was definitely only like 2 or 3 paragraphs, like less than half a page for sure.
Yeah.
And I think your comment there around, like, if you're like, maybe you're switching careers or something like that, and maybe the recruiter is looking for some extra explanation about why you're interested in this role, or something doesn't quite add up on the resume, and you can like speak to that context. That definitely helps as well, for sure. And I guess there is also jobs sometimes that require it, right? Sometimes when you're applying for a job, there's like the mandatory field to upload your cover letter. So in that case, you don't really have a choice. But regardless, I think keeping it short, concise. I think half a page is definitely more than enough. If it's a page, it's getting pretty long. But I think I found as I've gone through my career, I feel I have less and less need for one, but can definitely see in the earlier stages that it would be helpful to have.
Totally. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we've done the resume, the cover letter. Now it comes to actually going through the interview process and actually, interviewing at that company. And I know this is a hot area to talk about because there is a lot of different processes when it comes to interviewing. Do you want to maybe just share really briefly, like at a high level, what that looks like at Facebook, for example? What are kind of the different stages there?
Sure. I think that we're pretty standard with the industry, except for maybe like the app critique, which we have, which is like where you go through an app together and just like say what you like and don't like about it. I don't see that common in the industry, but otherwise it's super standard. Basically, jump on a call with a recruiter. They're just really there to help you prepare for the rest of the interview. So no worries there. Then you jump on 2 back-to-back interviews, which is a little bit weird, but I think maybe we do it for to respect everyone's time. But we have 2 back-to-back phone interviews. First one is, I'm like trying to remember my own.
It's okay. It doesn't have to be exact.
First one was like past work, so your portfolio. Second one was an app critique. Then you go on site where you do your past work again, app critique again, and then a whiteboard and background. So very standard.
Yeah, ours is kind of similar. There's like I work at Uber, by the way, for those who don't know. And usually there's like a phone screening from a recruiter. And then I think you have like a 30-minute interview with the hiring manager. And then there's kind of like a on-site, which is now virtual given the state of the world. But you basically come on site for a day. You present your portfolio to the team, and then you have like one-on-one interviews with certain members of the team, designers, some PMs, maybe sometimes an engineer. And yeah, then that's it. We try to like get it all done. And then we kind of debrief and get back to the candidate. Sometimes we can do like whiteboarding exercises or take-home assignments. I found that like the take-home assignments we often will do for more junior positions, or maybe we have a candidate who, again, is junior, is going through the interview process we're feeling really good about, but like maybe there's just one thing that we're a little unsure about, then we might ask them to do some sort of take-home exercise. And the whiteboarding exercise is usually done on that like on-site day, where it's usually with another designer or something like that. We kind of work through a problem statement together. What is your advice for those kind of whiteboarding app critiques, like those sort of interviews where you're like on the spot having to perform a little bit, right? And like work through a design problem and a design challenge? I think people can get really nervous. I definitely get nervous when going through these. What are your thoughts there on how to kind of best prepare for those?
For sure. I get nervous too, by the way. Like, there's never been a single time. I've never gotten to a point in my career where I don't walk into those kind of exercises not nervous. So right. Put that out there. I just basically practice and practice and practice. Like, I think it's just like you have to desensitize yourself to any questions that you may not expect, and just like learn how to handle them. And then for the questions that you can expect and you really can, like, I think 75% of the questions you get, you can probably anticipate ahead of time. Just really like hone your answer to those. You can basically just come in with a list of answers that you know that you can give right off the top of your head. But otherwise, you know, like obviously you can't prepare for the exact prompt, you can't prepare for the exact app that you're going to critique for sure, but you certainly can prepare a framework, which is definitely something I recommend. Have a framework. You probably know what exercise you're going to do, and so if it's a whiteboarding exercise, you're likely going to go through like an end-to-end problem. So you're going to have to go through the problem exploration, maybe go through the type of like the personas you have to address, and then the solution, like roughly, you know, break that down a little bit more. But have a framework for yourself, have a time box for each section of your framework, and just go through it. Like you probably, if you practice enough, you've probably done it a million times, and just do that again, but in person.
Yeah, I agree. I think practice is definitely helpful. There's only so much you can prepare for, right? And so I always make sure that I have like fallbacks, like in a moment where I'm not sure, or I don't know, then like I kind of have a fallback response or steps to like work through that if I'm experiencing that in a moment. I would also say I haven't done app critiques, so I'm not entirely sure how that works, but for the whiteboarding challenges, I actually like when this is a collaborative process and like we're jamming together, like you're asking me questions, you know, we're kind of working through a problem together. It doesn't have to be such a 100% solo endeavor. Obviously, you're leading it and you're guiding the conversation, but don't be afraid, I think, to involve the interviewer as well in that exercise.
If anything, I would say you get bonus points for amazing collaboration. We totally notice that kind of stuff. If you ask the right questions and you really work with your interviewers, you definitely get bonus points. But I want to ask you, Femke, because you and I just admitted to being super nervous about this kind of stuff. What is your favorite part of the entire interview?
Oh, I like the one-on-one time that I have with the candidate. Usually we have like 30 to 45 minutes. And what I usually do in that time is prior to that, they've done a portfolio presentation. So I've seen their work, and I will usually take a project that they've shown, like a piece of their work, and deep dive into it a little bit more, ask them a few more questions. Maybe I want to deep dive into a certain area or like problem area. Like maybe I want to dive deep into how you discover and explore different solutions, for example. So I really like that, going deep one-on-one with the candidate. And then also, to me, it's really important to make sure that they also have time to ask me questions, because it's not all about like them, it's also like they're also interviewing us in a way, right? So hopefully if you're interviewing with someone, they give you time at the end to ask them a few questions. So I make sure to carve that space out as well, so that I can answer any questions they have about working at Uber.
Nice. Is that your favorite also as a candidate yourself?
As a candidate, I like the portfolio presentation.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary, but it's also fun, and like you get your chance to like talk about your work and like shine. You can make it what you want. There's total creative freedom. And I've seen, you know, some really cool portfolio presentations in the past. And yeah, I don't know. It's fun to talk about your work.
Agreed. It's like I'm the most familiar with this part of the interview.
Yeah.
I also feel the same.
Yeah, it's the one I feel most confident in because I can 100% prepare for it and like deliver that presentation. So I feel like I have most control over that part.
Totally.
I like someone in the chat said their favorite part is the offer. I agree. That is the best part.
Yep. Change my answer. Offer.
Thanks, Karan. Cool. Can you share a little bit more about the app critique? I'm not super familiar with it, but I've had people ask me in the past actually for like feedback and tips on how to do a successful app critique. What does that look like?
Yeah, totally. So app critique, I admitted, I don't think it's super common. And I interviewed people with this exercise and Facebook. So that's a little bit weird that I've had more experience with it than without. But this is kind of like the general exercise. You basically, you and your interviewer will be matched based on the device that you use. So you'll be matched with an iOS user if you're iOS, and then Android if you're an Android. So you come into the meeting and they'll probably be like, what kind of apps do you use daily, list off a couple, and then after a couple they'll be like, okay, let's pick blank. Like I usually pick Spotify, for example. I hope that's not a spoiler, but I always pick Spotify if they say Spotify, because I think it's something super easy to go through end to end. And then I'll just be like, okay, tell me what you see, think out loud, tell me what you like about what you see, what do you think is doing a great job, what type of problem they're trying to solve with this design, and also what type of improvements you would make, and basically go through the entire app just like that.
Wow. And what are you looking for in their responses?
Usually the signal that I'm looking for here is product strategy. So ability to identify opportunities. You know, certainly that question about improvement is not only at the design level, but also the product level. One of the questions I like to ask is, if you were the CEO, what would you change? So certainly need to hit that product skill. Two certainly is interaction. I want you to notice you know, like some minor interactions and be like, ooh, this is really delightful, or ooh, this interaction doesn't do a great job of educating the user about this thing. And then finally, visual design. If you see like there are going to be mistakes in every single app, so you might be like, oh, there's an inconsistency here, or maybe you'll be like, this doesn't align with iOS best practices. Those are great things to point out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so curious about it. I've never done one, but I've had a lot of people asking me for my thoughts on it, and I've thought about like doing my own one like as a YouTube video, but I don't know how helpful it would be because I don't often know what people are looking for in those challenges. So it's really great to hear from your perspective the things you're looking for. And I think it was the first one you said was like the product thinking. That's so important as a product designer. So yeah, it's really cool to hear more about that. Thanks for sharing.
Totally.
Let's move on to our last topic before going into Q&A, because I think this topic, you know, has a lot behind it, which is around imposter syndrome and sort of like, how do you know when you're ready to apply for a job, which jobs you should apply for, you know, feeling confident and good about your skills to apply for the right jobs. I've definitely felt imposter syndrome in the past when applying for jobs and looking at jobs and thinking, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if I could work there? Like, too bad I'm not good enough, or like, too bad I don't have like the right skills, or feeling like I don't have the right skills. So yeah, what's your experience with this? Is this something that you've experienced before? And if so, how do you overcome it?
Totally. I think by default, I think everyone experiences it. I just think it's it's just a human nature thing to have insecurities. And so I think imposter syndrome is something that we should all just embrace as part of us. It's totally okay. I feel it all the time. I feel it in meetings. I feel it in my job. I feel it when I present things. I feel it when I interview for jobs, certainly. So I feel it no matter how many years of experience I have. If anything, the more years of experience, the more I feel it, because then that's when you really need to, you know, step up.
Right, right.
But I think in terms of tackling it, you brought up a really good point, right? Like, am I even qualified for this job? And one thing that I want to put out there is no recruiter expects you to meet 100% of the qualifications. Like, that's just not how it works. It's not like they're going down a list and being like, oh, 99%.
Checking the box.
Yeah, exactly. Like, only met 4 out of 5 boxes, out you go. No, absolutely not. That's not how it works. If anything, yeah. I actually read like a statistics, and I probably will say the wrong number, but they say like men tend to apply to jobs that they're like 50% qualified for, and women only apply when they're like 100% qualified for. And, you know, I think that speaks a lot to just the perception of your own abilities. I really don't think that you should worry about having to meet every single box before you apply. Just apply. And sometimes it's a numbers game. Like, you're going to have to apply to a whole bunch of them before you hear something back. But that's just the way it is. And a lot of the times, the reason why it doesn't work out may not have to do with, you know, your level of competency. It might just be filled already. It might just be they're looking for someone who has experience doing something completely different. A bunch of other reasons that you can't even fathom. So I just don't get so hard on yourself. I never try to take it personally anymore.
Yeah, I 100% agree that you don't need to meet 100% of the criteria in order to apply. I think like another good reminder is that often these job descriptions are written by recruiters, not designers. And so it's very like from a recruiting perspective, what they're looking for. And, you know, recruiters might not have all of the technical knowledge or familiarity like with what we're actually looking for in a designer. So I try to keep that in mind as well, that like it's very textbooky because that's what recruiters, you know, that's what they do. So yeah, if you look at a job and you're like, oh my gosh, they're looking for someone with 4 years experience, but I only have 3. Who cares? Apply. Like, they're not going to cut you off just because of that like one missing criteria. It's really just like, it's kind of like a broad, think of it as more of like a broad statement to try to attract the right type of people that they want.
Totally. Yeah. I have so many stories that I could spend hours on of people that we passed that we would love to have taken, but we just didn't have the infrastructure to support them. That's a great way to understand how it's just not you anymore. Like, it's only because we can't support the type of growth that you want. And so it's such a sad thing to never be able to explain to the candidate exactly why we rejected them, because there are all these like terrible laws now that prevent you from doing that.
It's awful.
But like so many times I wanted to tell a candidate, like, I promise it's not you, it's us. Like, we just can't support you right now, but you're an amazing designer.
Yeah, that's a good thing to remember as well. I've definitely been on the company side of that, where we're looking for a very particular kind of designer, or maybe a really particular skill set. Like, for example, we were once looking for a designer that had experience designing enterprise tools and experience in the advertising industry. Those are 2 very specific criteria, and to try and find someone who has both of those, you know, and so a lot of the time, like, you know, we turned candidates away, not because they were not great designers, but they just didn't meet that specific need that we had. Like, we really needed someone that could come in and like hit the ground running and jump into that space and take ownership of that space. So yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind too, like from the candidate's perspective, is like, it's not necessarily that you're not a great designer, it's just that it might not be the right time, right place. And also keep in mind, you want to join a team, you want to join a company that can support you, that can provide you with like any guidance or mentorship that you might require. And if they're not set up to do that, they're probably doing you a favor by turning you away, because you're not going to have a great time if you join somewhere and you don't have that support that you need.
Could not agree more.
Yeah. Have you ever had experiences around like imposter syndrome at work? I think you were mentioning earlier about like feeling it sometimes when you go to present something or like lead something. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I feel like we talk a lot about the imposter syndrome on the outside of like wanting to apply for somewhere or wanting to be something. But I feel like even once you're there, it's not like imposter syndrome immediately washes away once you get the job, right? Like, yeah. I still feel it too sometimes in my role, and I've been here almost 4 years. So curious to hear what that's like for you, like as a designer at Facebook.
Totally. So I had the amazing pleasure of hosting a talk from an expert in the field, and she cited some amazing research into the type of imposter syndromes that you might feel. And the one that I know I suffer from is called the expert, which is, unless I know literally everything that has to do with the topic at hand, I feel like I don't belong here. And so I feel that at work all the time. Like when I'm in a meeting, especially with cross-functional partners, especially with engineering, with product, or with data scientists, all these amazing fields that I have less experience in, I feel like an imposter, because I obviously cannot be an expert in everything. And I think that just knowing the type of imposter syndrome that I feel has been helpful. But certainly I still like information gather as a coping mechanism. I basically poke my nose into as many documents or as many specs as I could, just to prepare for knowledge that I'm supposed to have. And so I certainly feel it at Facebook. Every time I'm in a meeting and someone calls my name, I'm like, oh my God, I better be prepared. But I think over time, I've been a little bit better about just saying, I don't know. And then also just being a little bit more mature with saying like, I don't know, however, these are the other alternatives that you can take, or like these are people who know better, and just feeling good about that.
Yeah, I love that. That's something I'm trying to get better at as well. I feel like a lot of the time we're in these like brainstorms or like deep dive discussions, and then it's like, okay, so what do you think? What do you think? What's your opinion? And sometimes I'm like, I don't know, I need time to process this and like digest this information. But I also like, sometimes I'm afraid of saying I don't know, you know, because that makes me look like I don't know what I'm doing. And so yeah, I'm trying to like build up some of those tools as well, of like how to navigate those situations. And I think having support from your team around this is really, really important as well. Like the culture that you have, the support from other team members, you know, obviously we want to make sure that everything is like a safe, welcoming environment, which can take time to build. But yeah, I've definitely felt this as well, especially, I don't know how often you have to do this in your role, but occasionally I might have to give a presentation to like senior leadership. And that can definitely be very scary as this little designer on the team to give a big presentation. And in those moments, I just practice. Like that's my way of preparing and making myself feel confident and ready, as I just practice and practice and practice. So yeah, I think like there can be different strategies for different people depending on what it is that you struggle with or the situation. But know that you're not alone and that it happens to the best of us.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely cannot agree more.
Awesome. Well, we've got quite a few questions that have come through during this stream, which I have saved, and I would love to dive into some of this. Those of you who are watching live, if you have any more questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll do my best to see how we can get to some of these. Probably not going to get through all of them. I think I have like over 20 that I've copied over, but let's see where we can start. Okay. Okay. Someone's asking about NDAs. I feel like this is something I hear a lot about as well in regards to like putting together your portfolio and your case studies. Do you have any advice for those situations where work is under an NDA? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, my work at IBM is under NDA, and I'm sure a portion of my work at Facebook certainly will be someday if I choose to leave. So I'm certainly very aware of how tough it is to try to present your work under an NDA. I am fortunate enough that both cases, the type of NDA it is that you just simply can't have it be public, but you can certainly talk about it in an interview setting. So it's a little bit easier because then in that case, I can be like, at Facebook, I work on Instagram and Messenger, but if you want to learn more, talk to me, you know?
Right.
So it's certainly a little bit easier that way, but I have heard cases where people just cannot talk about it, period.
Oh, they can't even mention it?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
this was a mentee of mine, and we had a little bit back and forth about this, and he was just like, yeah, I went back to my hiring manager, I went back to my work, and they said I cannot talk about it, period. This is classified work.
wow.
That was crazy. I think it was like the past 2 years of his life. So
Oh my
it's a lot
gosh.
to have to explain. And so if that is the scenario for you, unfortunately, I think you just have to abide by legalities. You never want to get yourself in trouble. And
Right.
if you can, the suggestions I made were like, maybe try to fit in a side project if you can, that can, showcase your best skills. It can be super, super small, just anything that is public facing that proves you know your stuff. I think that's it. So I think those are unfortunate cases where you just have to put in additional hours to prove your worth, especially given that it is like, 2+ years of your life, and you really need to make sure that you prove yourself as, say, like a senior designer in that case. If you're a junior, maybe a little bit less, but certainly the more senior you are, the more you need to make sure you're up to par.
Yeah, wow, that really sucks if you can't even like mention the project or the work. I haven't spoken to anyone in that situation, but that sounds really difficult. Yeah, I think your advice is great. I usually recommend, like, if you can, put it behind a password protected page on your website. Like, make sure you're at least like speaking to it, and then providing a way to see more detail that's like behind a password or something if you need to.
Totally.
But yeah,
and
it can be
actually,
tricky.
one thing that I like doing, and I would wish more people did this, is I see so many portfolios where the first thing I see when I land on it is just the password input. Like, that's it. I can't even see like an about you or anything like that. And I think it would just be great if you could just protect pieces that are actually confidential. I would love to get anything like that I can from you, like who you are, how many years of experience, what type of designer you are. And then even when you do password protect your work, it would be actually great if you can include like your contact information next to the input that says like, if you don't have the password, reach out to me at this email. Then at least it's like not a dead end, and it's like a next foot forward. So make it as easy for the recruiter or the hiring manager as possible to get around the password thing.
Totally. I agree. Okay, we had a few questions also around like showcasing impact and metrics, when this can be really difficult for junior designers or folks coming out of a boot camp or something, where maybe they haven't had real world experience yet, or they haven't worked on projects that they're able to extract those like business impact metrics from. What's your advice in this area? Because it can be tricky if you don't have that. I think obviously don't want to make something up, but I think it's still like worthwhile kind of addressing somehow in your work.
Totally. I think it is certainly tricky, but you can actually address impact hypothetically, because you can always like think about the impact it could have. So for instance, if you made I'm pulling like a familiar example to myself, but like if you made a job board like AngelList, like your top line metric is probably going to be like number of candidates on the platform or number of job applications sent in, right? So whatever you design that affects that metric, at least acknowledge the metric itself. So say like impact is like, the goal is to 2x this metric. I don't have an answer because this is a concept project, but the fact that you even know what your success metric is and you lined all of your work towards that final metric means a lot.
Yeah, I agree. At least acknowledging that potential metric, right? Even if you don't have like results for it necessarily, but showing that you have this understanding from a product perspective about like, this is what we would measure, or like, this is something that was important we were considering throughout the process.
Oh, absolutely.
Another like area you could focus impact on, I think, is design impact. I think we talk a lot about like business impact, which of course is very important. Maybe have a look through your project or have a think back, a little bit of a reflection, and see if there's any moments of design impact you could talk about. I don't know, maybe you went ahead and like created a design system for the project and it made everyone on the team's life better. Like that's a great example of like impact on design. Might not necessarily be relating back to top line business metrics, but you know, are there opportunities where you've had impact back on the team that you're working with, or impact like from a design perspective? I think that that's also some relevant things that you could talk about in this area.
Completely agree. Yeah. And I mean, even that, like I could still trace that back to business impact. It's, you know, business impact is either money saved or money gained. And so like if you made a design system that saved people hours, that's money saved. So that's
true.
Huge. Yeah.
For sure. Cool. Okay, let's see some of these other ones that we have. Okay, so someone was asking, for people that are transitioning careers, what are your thoughts on including past experience from other fields that may relate to UX?
I mean, this might be like a case by case basis. If your past career, for example, was a front-end developer, probably really easy to translate the similar skills over. And so maybe it does make sense to have that on there if you have no other UX work.
Yeah.
But if it was something like architecture, or like, let's go really far away. Like, I'm like,
maybe you're like a real estate agent and you want to become a UX designer.
Yes. Yeah. Real estate agent, like that, I think might be a little bit too far-fetched. If it's not obvious to the recruiter or your employer how the skills translate over, I wouldn't really include it on your portfolio.
Yeah, I agree. I think like if there's something you've learned in your real estate agency career that is like a transferable skill, then for sure, talk about it, mention it. I think I've seen, I might be making this up a little bit, but I feel like I've seen applicants who like, they're applying for, okay, like let's say, for example, they're applying to be a designer at a fintech company and they previously worked at a bank, not as a designer, but like they worked in that industry. I've seen them talk about that because that's relevant, right? Like that's relevant kind of industry experience. So if there's a way to tie it that way, I think that's also an interesting way to talk about it.
Heavy +1. Oh my goodness. Yes. If you're like an architect and you work on like architect software, which I actually saw someone do.
Oh,
that's
wow.
amazing. That's so good. Yeah. You should definitely include that. Yeah.
Yeah. So think about the industry as well and how or if that is applicable. Okay, so we had a question on take-home assignments. How do you constrain yourself with a take-home assignment? It's easy to spend a lot of time on them. I remember doing my take-home assignment for Uber, and I believe they'd given rough guidelines of like, you know, a day's worth of work or like 8 hours worth of work. And so I remember trying to constrain myself to that, but I believe I did go over maybe 2 days. So 2 days total. I think like another, or like an area that I think can work well when it comes to setting constraints is like not necessarily the time, but also like the scope or like the level of fidelity. I feel like I've seen a lot of take-home assignments where they think they need to do the whole end-to-end design process, have like a beautiful high mock-up, like working product. And that's definitely not the case. It's not the expectation that I at least have. And so I remember, even though I took a bit of time on my take-home assignment when I did it, I definitely set myself constraints, and I was upfront about those constraints when I presented it, that like, I'm going to stick to low fidelity mocks. I'm going to make a few assumptions so I can skip that part of the design process. So that's kind of how I've tackled it in the past. I don't know if you've ever done a take-home assignment or seen any where they've set some good constraints.
Yeah, I have definitely done take-home aspirations, and I completely agree with you. I probably had 2x whatever time constraint they gave me. I think they said like 4 to 6 hours. I spent a full day, or like if it's a full day, I spent 2 days for sure. I think it's super normal to go over, because at the end of the day, I always get the sense that they want to give a low number because they don't want this to become like a full-time project for you.
Right.
But at the same time, of course, you're going to take longer. Oh my goodness, design takes a long time.
Yeah.
Like this is, you know, big stuff. So I don't know, the number never seems to match reality. And I completely agree with that. But in terms of the constraints in take-home projects, I actually think having constraints is a beautiful thing in that exercise, because like we just mentioned before, when you're going to design at an actual company and get some real world experience, you're going to know that there are constraints left and right. And proving the ability to work around them is really valuable. So for instance, if you're strapped for time, which you're going to be in your job as well, see how you can deliver the most impact within that time. So like whether it means only making low fidelity mocks, like you said, or focusing on high fidelity mocks for only 3 key screens. Like that's another way that you can totally just hit it home without focusing on like the settings menu or like the logging screen, you know? And so you can totally show how you understand working on like around these constraints. And another thing, like I said, is also like hypotheticals. Like you can totally put in some hypotheticals in there. You can be like, if I had more time, I would do X, Y, and Z. The next steps past this project, I would propose X, Y, and Z. Improvements I would make to my solution are X, Y, and Z. Like all of those hypotheticals are super valuable.
Yeah, 100% agree. I agree, and like want to reiterate that, you don't have to do the entire end-to-end process of the design. And I think like where you're setting those constraints, like a little bit of justification as to why, and then, you know, you can focus on the areas that are like high impact. Okay, last question, because we're running out of time. There were a few questions around how many projects to include in a portfolio. My typical advice here is like 3 feels like a good number, maybe like 5 to 6. And like we mentioned, I think at the beginning, those projects should be like related to the design skill or area that, you know, you are or that you want to be working in. What do you think? How many projects do you think, or do you typically expect to see?
My magic number is always 3 to 4. I definitely try not to recommend above 4 because, again, I did so much research into this, and the average amount of time that recruiters and hiring managers spend on your portfolio is like 5 minutes average, 10 minutes maximum. Like 10 minutes is extremely generous and also very rare. So if you have 4+ case studies on there, there's no way they're getting through every single one, especially if they're long. So I would probably say 3 to 4. Obviously, depending on unique circumstances, again, like you just mentioned, if you have different backgrounds, different types of projects, if some of them are conceptual and some of them touch, you know, the first part of the design process and another touches the second half of the design process, then you obviously need both to really fill that full picture. But I think 3 to 4 for most people is good.
Yeah. Quality over quantity, right? Especially in this case. Awesome. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you for all of your questions, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them. You can always reach out to us, though. I've just popped Lily's links again in the chat. I'm sure she's happy to for you to reach out to her if you have more questions, and as am I. This has been recorded. I know there were a few questions throughout the stream if we were recording this. Yes, it's recorded, and I'll be publishing it on SuperPair in a few days and sending out the link in my email newsletter. Lily, thank you so much for joining. This was a really relevant topic, I think, for a lot of folks, and given your experience and, you know, the context of your newsletter, I couldn't have thought of a better person to have this conversation with. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. I had such a blast just hanging out with you.
Yay. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your Friday and a great weekend. And I will be back with another live stream, I believe 2 weeks from now. So yeah, have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.